Winter in Alaska is no ordinary season. In the far reaches of the north, where daylight fades to a dim blue glow and snowdrifts pile higher than fences, winter is a force of nature, powerful, relentless, and unforgiving. It was January 1925, and in the small town of Nome, Alaska, the people were used to the cold. They had learned to live with the biting winds and the long, dark nights. They wrapped themselves in thick furs, chopped wood for warmth, and shared stories by the fire to pass the endless winter hours. But this winter was different. It carried with it something far more dangerous than snow or ice. It carried death. The first signs were subtle. A child with a sore throat, a slight fever, nothing unusual for the cold months. But soon the sickness spread. Dr. Curtis Welch, the town's only physician, examined his young patients with growing concern. Their symptoms were all too familiar: swollen necks, labored breathing, bluish skin. He had seen this before. Long ago, during his training. It was diphtheria, a highly contagious, deadly disease, especially among children. His worst fears were confirmed when several children died within days of each other. The town council met in hushed urgency, the grim faces of parents etched with fear. Nome was isolated at the best of times, but in the depths of winter, it was completely cut off. The ports were frozen solid. Snowstorms had buried the railways and trails. Airplanes of the era were grounded by the brutal weather. The nearest life-saving antitoxin serum lay over 1,000 kilometers away, in Anchorage. Without it, Dr. Welch warned, the epidemic could wipe out the entire town. Panic rippled through Nome like the icy wind off the Bering Sea. There were only about 1,400 residents in Nome, but many more lived in outlying settlements. If the disease spread unchecked, thousands could die. Desperation mounted. Telegram wires buzzed urgently across the territory, carrying pleas for help. Supplies of diphtheria antitoxin existed in Anchorage, but how to get them to Nome through the frozen wilderness? Time was running out. Every hour mattered. If they waited, the children of Nome and their families would perish. There was only one hope left: sled dogs. Hardy, loyal, and bred for the bitter Alaskan wilderness, sled dogs had long been the lifeline of remote communities. They could travel where machines could not, across treacherous ice fields and through blinding blizzards. A relay was proposed, an unprecedented race against time, with teams of mushers and their dog teams passing the serum from one to the next across the frozen frontier. The plan was simple in theory, but terrifying in reality. The trail from Anchorage to Nome stretched over 1,000 kilometers of ice-choked rivers, wind-blasted tundra, and jagged mountain passes. Temperatures plunged to 50 degrees C. Winds roared at speeds of up to 80 kilometers per hour. No one had ever attempted such a journey in the heart of winter, but they had no choice. The call went out to the most skilled mushers and their dogs. Among them, an unexpected name: Gunnar Kaasen, and his lead dog, a black and white husky named Balto. Balto wasn't the obvious hero. In fact, among dog teams he had something of an underdog reputation. Unlike the sleek prized racing dogs, Balto was considered an average working sled dog. He had strength and stamina, yes, but he lacked the flashy pedigree of more famous lead dogs. Some doubted whether he had the instincts and intelligence to lead a team through such brutal conditions. But Kaasen saw something in him, a spark of determination, a quiet resilience. And so, Balto would run. He didn't know the stakes, of course. He couldn't understand the desperate telegrams or the frantic preparations. But he could feel the urgency in his musher's voice, the tension in the lines of the harness, the cold bite of the wind on his fur. And when the moment came, He would give everything he had. The Serum left Anchorage by train, racing as far north as the rails would allow. From there, the glass vials of precious medicine, wrapped in thick layers of insulating material to prevent freezing, were handed off to the first musher. And so began the greatest dog sled relay in history. 20 teams of mushers and over 150 dogs would carry the Serum across the perilous wilderness, braving the most severe winter conditions in memory. Night and day blurred together in a frozen haze as the teams pressed on. They crossed frozen rivers, where the ice cracked and moaned beneath their paws. They climbed wind-swept ridges, their fur encrusted with ice, their breath forming clouds in the frigid air. Blizzards blinded them, storms pushed them to the brink, but still they ran. Because in Nome, children were waiting. Because in Nome, hope hung by a thread. Balto and Gunnar Kassen's team were tasked with the final, most dangerous leg of the journey. The storm had worsened by the time they took the handoff. Visibility dropped to almost zero. Snow whipped sideways through the air, and the temperature plummeted to life-threatening lows. Others had urged Kassen to wait out the storm. But time was something Nome could not afford. He trusted his dogs. He trusted Balto. And so, with the wind howling like a living thing, they plunged into the white abyss. Balto led the team with unwavering focus, his ears pinned against the wind, his eyes narrowed against the stinging snow. Trail markers were buried beneath drifts. Frozen river crossings were slick with treacherous ice. But Balto pressed on, his paws bleeding, his muscles burning, his breath a cloud of frost. There were moments when Kassen could barely see a few meters ahead, moments when he feared they were lost, that they would vanish into the storm like so many before them. But Balto, somehow, always found the way. Through instinct, through sheer determination, through something deeper, something beyond understanding. By dawn, after running through the endless night, Kassen and his exhausted team arrived in Nome. The Serum, frozen, unbroken, and still potent, was delivered into the hands of the waiting doctors. The town had been saved. Cheers erupted in the streets as news spread. People wept with relief. Children, their faces pale from fever, would live to see another spring. And at the center of it all stood Balto, his fur crusted with ice, his body trembling with fatigue, but his eyes bright with quiet triumph. He didn't know the history he had just made. He didn't need to. He had done what he was born to do. The morning after the Serum arrived in Nome, the town awoke to a different kind of silence. Gone was the hush of fear, replaced now by the breathless stillness of relief. For the first time in weeks, the dark cloud of despair had lifted. The vials of diphtheria antitoxin rushed across the frozen wilderness by 20 brave teams of mushers, and over 150 sled dogs had come just in time. Doctors worked tirelessly through the day and night, administering doses to the sick. One by one, the fevers broke, and children who had been on the brink of death opened their eyes to see their families at their bedsides. The people of Nome, bundled in heavy furs, gathered in the streets to celebrate. They did not cheer for politicians or scientists. They cheered for their dogs. They cheered for Balto. News of the great Serum run spread like wildfire across the United States. In an era before television or the internet, newspapers carried the story to every corner of the country. Headlines in bold letters told of the daring sled dog teams that had battled hurricane-force winds and Arctic temperatures to save a remote town. But one name appeared in every report: Balto. The husky who led the final, most dangerous stretch of the journey captured the public's imagination. Photographs of Balto, frost still clinging to his whiskers, were printed on front pages nationwide. Journalists described him as the dog with ice in his veins and iron in his paws. Children cut out his picture and pinned it to their walls. Adults spoke of him in tones of admiration and wonder. Even in bustling New York City, far from the icy trails of Alaska, people couldn't stop talking about the brave black-and-white husky who had delivered hope through the storm. Within weeks, Balto and his musher, Gunnar Kaasen, were invited to New York for a hero's welcome. The city that never slept paused its hurried rhythm to honor a sled dog from the frozen frontier. As Balto stepped off the train at Grand Central Terminal, crowds of cheering New Yorkers awaited him. Cameras flashed, reporters jostled for position, and children waved handmade signs. To Balto, it was all a blur of noise and movement. But to the people, he was a living legend. Parades were held in his honor. Banners bearing his name stretched across the streets. Crowds lined sidewalks to catch a glimpse of the hero dog and his musher. "Balto!" they cheered, as if his very name carried the weight of the triumph over death itself. For a moment, Balto represented something more than survival. He represented unity. He represented the indomitable spirit that, even in the face of overwhelming odds, refuses to surrender. Not long after, a tribute of lasting significance was planned, a monument to the brave dogs of the Serum Run, with Balto as their symbol. In the heart of New York City's Central Park, a bronze statue was commissioned. The sculptor, Frederick Roth, captured Balto mid-stride, ears perked, eyes forward, strength radiating from every line of his body. The base of the statue bore an inscription, dedicated to the indomitable spirit of the sled dogs that relayed antitoxin 600 miles over rough ice, across treacherous waters, through Arctic blizzards from Nenana to the relief of stricken Nome in the winter of 1925. Endurance, fidelity, intelligence. On the day the statue was unveiled, hundreds gathered despite the winter chill. Children climbed onto their parents' shoulders for a better view. Elderly veterans of the Alaskan frontier wiped tears from their eyes. And Balto himself was there. He stood at the foot of his own likeness, his thick fur gleaming in the pale sunlight, as if he understood the moment's gravity. When Kaasen lifted Balto's paw and waved it to the crowd, a cheer rose so loud it echoed through the park. But Balto's story didn't end there. Rather than retiring in luxury, Balto and his team embarked on a nationwide tour to raise funds and awareness for Alaskan communities. They visited schools, hospitals, and town halls. Everywhere they went, Balto was met with admiration. Children touched his thick fur with awe, imagining the blizzards he had braved. Adults shook Kaasen's hand, their gratitude genuine and deep. The tour wasn't just a celebration, it was a mission. It raised money to support medical services and improve conditions for sled dogs and their handlers in Alaska. Balto had become more than a hero of Nome. He was a hero for all of America. Yet, as time passed and the headlines faded, so too did the frenzy of public attention. Balto and his team found themselves sold to a vaudeville circuit, performing in small theaters for curious audiences. The bright lights and noisy crowds were a far cry from the icy trails of Alaska, but even there, Balto remained dignified. He performed with grace, his legacy undiminished by the novelty of the stage. Eventually, Balto's fate took a turn for the better. Animal advocates and admirers raised funds to rescue him and his fellow sled dogs from show business life. They were brought to the Cleveland Zoo, where they were given proper care and a safe, comfortable place to live out their days. Visitors came from far and wide to see the hero dog, to stand by his enclosure and reflect on the incredible journey that had saved a town from disaster. For Balto, the adventures may have ended, but his impact endured. Balto lived out his final years in peace, surrounded by those who loved and honored him. When he passed away in 1933, his body was preserved and placed on display at the Cleveland Museum of Natural History, where it remains to this day, not as a spectacle, but as a tribute, as a reminder of courage, as a celebration of the unbreakable bond between humans and animals. To this day, children press their hands to the glass case, staring wide-eyed at the dog who had once run through the worst blizzards to deliver life-saving medicine. They read his story and feel their hearts swell with inspiration. They see in Balto not just a hero of history, but a lesson for the future. That courage comes in all forms, that even in the harshest storms, hope can survive, and that sometimes heroes walk on four paws. Balto's legacy lives on in books, documentaries, animated films, and the hearts of those who cherish true stories of bravery. Every year, visitors to Central Park still stop at his statue. They trace the bronze letters of his name with their fingertips. They leave flowers at the base. They tell their children the story of the dog who wouldn't give up. And as the sun sets over the park, casting long shadows across the snowy paths, it's easy to imagine that Balto's spirit still lingers, proud, watchful, and forever running toward hope. Decades had passed since Balto's paws last touched the snow-covered trails of Alaska. The blizzards he had braved were long gone, melted into history. The children of Nome, once sick with fever, had grown into healthy adults. New generations filled the town, running and laughing along the very streets where, so many years earlier, fear had hung heavy in the icy air. But Balto's story never faded. If anything, it only grew stronger with time. In classrooms across America, teachers spoke of the brave sled dog who had led his team through a deadly storm to save a town. Children sat wide-eyed, imagining Balto's fur frozen with ice, his breath clouding the bitter air, his eyes locked on the horizon as he pressed forward through the snow. Books chronicled his journey, from the desperate telegrams sent from Nome to the final triumphant arrival of the life-saving serum. Writers described the unbearable cold, the relentless winds, and the iron will of the dogs and their mooshers. And always, at the center of every story, was Balto. Not the fastest dog, not the flashiest, but the one who, when it mattered most, refused to give up. The one who carried hope on his back and delivered life to a dying town. In museums, Balto's legacy remained proudly on display. At the Cleveland Museum of Natural History, visitors crowded around the glass case where Balto's preserved figure stood in quiet dignity. Parents lifted their children so they could see the hero dog up close, tracing their small fingers over the descriptions of his bravery. Some visitors came out of curiosity. Many left with tears in their eyes. Because looking at Balto was not just looking at history. It was looking at a story of loyalty, perseverance, and courage that transcended time. A story that belonged to everyone. Even in popular culture, Balto's tale found new life. Animated films retold his journey, capturing the imaginations of young audiences worldwide. The 1995 animated movie Balto, though a dramatized version of events, introduced millions of children to the hero of the North, sparking curiosity about the real story. Documentaries explored the incredible serum run in detail, interviewing historians, mooshers, and descendants of the original teams. Each retelling added new layers of admiration for the dog who had become a symbol of resilience. But perhaps the most enduring tribute remained where it had stood since 1925, in Central Park, New York City. There, amidst the trees and winding paths, Balto's bronze statue continued to stand proudly. Seasons changed around it. Snow blanketed the ground in winter, mirroring the trails Balto once conquered. Spring blossoms framed the statue in bursts of color. In summer, children climbed onto the base to pose for photos, laughing as their parents snapped pictures. Inscribed at the statue's base, the words remained clear and powerful. Endurance, fidelity, intelligence. Tour guides led groups to the statue, recounting Balto's story with reverence. Joggers paused to rest beside him, reading the inscription as if drawing strength from the spirit of the steadfast husky. Tourists from around the world made pilgrimages to see the monument, to touch the bronze ears polished bright by countless hands. And every year, on the anniversary of the Serum Run, a quiet crowd gathered at the statue to remember the dog who would not be stopped. For the people of Nome, the story was more than a chapter in history. It was a living memory. Plaques and markers in the town commemorated the Great Serum Run of 1925. In local schools, students learned of the brave mushers and their incredible teams of dogs who risked their lives to save their community. During winter festivals, sled dog races were held in honor of the Serum Run, a tribute to the spirit of those who had faced down the frozen wilderness. And in every household, old photographs and family stories kept the memory alive. Some of the children who had been saved by the serum lived long enough to tell their grandchildren about the day Balto and his team arrived, about the day hope returned to Nome. Balto's legacy extended even further. Inspired by his story, programs across the United States promoted the importance of working dogs in rescue operations. Search and rescue dogs, avalanche dogs, and therapy animals were celebrated as everyday heroes, following in the paw prints of Balto and his team. Mushers, too, honored Balto's memory. The Iditarod Trail sled dog race, one of the most grueling long-distance races in the world, traces part of the same route used during the Serum Run. Each year, mushers from around the globe gather to test their skill and courage against the brutal Alaskan wilderness, a living tribute to the determination that once saved a town. And though Balto himself never raced in the Iditarod, his spirit runs alongside every team that braves the trail. But beyond races, beyond statues, beyond films and museum displays, Balto's true legacy lived in something deeper. In the quiet reminder that heroes can come from the most unexpected places. That greatness is not about fame or pedigree, but about heart. About answering the call when it matters most. About pressing forward, step by frozen step, even when the world seems lost to storm and shadow. Balto's journey was not one of luxury or ease. It was one of grit, of loyalty, of a determination so fierce that it carved its place into history. And in that, Balto became more than a hero. He became a symbol of what we all hope to be in our darkest hours: steadfast, brave, unyielding. As the sun dips below the skyline of New York City, casting long golden rays over Central Park, Balto's statue catches the light. For a moment, it almost seems as if the bronze husky is alive once more, his gaze set on some far-off horizon, ready to run again if the world should need him. And somewhere, in the hearts of those who know his story, he is, running still, always running, for hope, for life, for us all.